Hi, today I want to talk to you about an article that appeared a week ago in the Corriere della Sera in Italy. The article talks about the discovery of a number of texts by a journalist named Eugenio Balzan. The article is by Gian Antonio Stella, who should be well known to a number of people who are familiar with Italian studies on immigration and emigration, because his most famous book, that is for those of us in Italian studies or Italian American studies, is L'Orda, Quando gli Albanesi eravamo noi, or The Horde, when we were the Albanese, as it says. And in that book, in fact, he speaks about the historical emigration from Italy to the United States. In this article of a week ago, which has a title, Tutti clandestini nelle Americhe, because le Americhe was, in fact, sort of terminology that we used by many, he speaks, in fact, about how that experience of over 100 years ago is sort of reflected today in the experience of the immigrants, those coming to Italy, the immigrants in Italy. And there are a couple of things that I just would like to cite from it to underscore these uncanny parallels. For example, he writes about, in fact, the l'impreparazione della gente of today, that is the non-preparation, the impreparation of the people today, people who are not really aware of what that history was like. And he says what people believe, in fact, is the fact that the emigration of our grandparents, as he writes, was completely different from those of the immigrants in Italy today. Because our grandparents went with, we say in Italian, with the documenti in regola, with all their papers in order, very faithful with all the laws and rules and laws that they were going to come across, and in a country which had so much work, and welcomed them with open arms. And then he says, falso, false. And of course, it's true, because we know that, in fact, while there were many Italian immigrants who arrived in North America, the United States, and this book deals specifically with Canada. With Canada, we know that there were many who came, quote unquote, with all their papers in order. There were also those who didn't have their papers in order and who belonged to that sort of group, as we call them today, of illegal immigrants or illegal aliens. The other thing that I think is in this article that sort of reflects the attitude of then and the attitude of today is he quotes from different parts of the book, this collection, and I'll get to that soon. And he says that there were 1,800 men armed in the so-called Divisione Scarlatta, the Scarlet Division, who were secretly cleaning the district. This is a town in Canada. Secretly cleaning the district and waiting for the order to exterminate these mice. He calls them questi topi. And then, in fact, Stella goes on to say, I bravi cittadini canadesi parlavano a nome del loro simile. That is, the good Canadian citizens were speaking about those who are like them. And then he says, and Balzan says, whereas our grandparents were topi. I cite this for basically one reason. At the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, we find two very disturbing images, cartoons, vignettes in the American print media. We find in 1888 in a journal called The Mascot, a triptych and a sort of diptych. And the diptych has how to get rid of them, meaning them being the Italians. And the triptych has them in this big cage that's about to be dumped into water. That, of course, is before the ASPCA existed, before we even conceived of cruelty to animals. That's how we got rid of the so-called pests, the pests being the rats, the rodents, the topi, whatever. And it also reminds me of a cartoon in 1903 that was published in Judge magazine, in which we have a similar representation of the immigrant. And there's this sort of funnel from which all these little animals are falling out with human heads. And it says, direct from the slums, direct daily from the slums of Europe. And basically they are Italians, and they have dark complexion, long, big handlebar mustaches, little hats on their heads with the brims up, and there are various things written: socialisti, socialist, anarchici, anarchists, mafia, and so on and so forth. Human heads, rats' bodies. So that idea of the dehumanization of the immigrant, it existed 120 years ago in 1888, as it exists in many ways also today, as we see with the immigration of today. I want to close this with another quote in which Stella tells us that Eugenio Balzan, in the book called Corriere 1901, Corriere 1901, and it was edited by Renata Brogini, that there are 3 points in common between those of 100 and some odd years ago and the immigrants of today. And that is that there was the dream to do better, that there was, of course, the person or the trap that was going to deceive them about the dream, and of course there was the sadness of the betrayed dream. Those 3 things. And that wants me to leave you with the famous, if not infamous, saying that you find in Ellis Island when you go to Ellis Island today, and on those many walls of photographs, you see that there's a saying from an anonymous immigrant. They told me that the streets were paved with gold, and when I got here, I found out not only were the streets not paved with gold, but they weren't paved at all, and that I was the one who had to pave them. So I leave you with that. I leave you with that thought of our grandparents who came over, who perhaps weren't, as some of our unprepared elected officials have tried to tell us in the last few years, who weren't all, quote unquote, legal immigrants, who weren't all dying to become American citizens, and who didn't all learn immediately English, compared to those of today, who basically find themselves in the same situation. So I leave you with that, and I will tell you that sometime in the next 6 to 8 months, we here at the Calandra Institute will deal specifically with this issue. So I'll see you next time. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.